Well, today is going to be an interesting discussion. I have two guests with me who have been frequent guests of my program at different iterations. And we're going to be talking about a topic that is on the minds of a lot of Americans, which is uh, how do we have safe communities, but at the same time do things right by people who are running afoul of the law so that we don't use too much force or excessive force or prejudicial practices or, doing things that inflame communities rather than create peace and harmony in a secure neighborhood that everybody wants. So, of course, there's this the we are doing this in the beginnings of the George Floyd trial about Derek Chauvin and what happened with that situation. So, of course, this is a topic that's on the news, and we want to dive into it. And so, to do so, we have with us Dale Brown, who is the founder of the Detroit Threat Management Center in Detroit, Michigan, where he has been providing some creative um, solutions from the market to provide peacekeeping and to mitigate threats and to avoid conflicts in his community through some very interesting creative techniques and strategies that he's developed. So we're going to get into that. We also have with us Detective John Baeza. He was at the NYPD, where he was first an undercover narcotics detective, and then he went into Special Victims Unit after he saw the folly of the drug war and realized this is not for him. And so he's also been someone who has been a great voice that I look to understand how to correct policing, how to correct the way we're doing crime prevention. So thank you both for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Very good. So let's start with Dale Brown, since you're here to my left where I'm looking. Tell me a little bit about your background. What got you into what you're doing in Detroit?
Well, I was a martial artist my entire life. So, and I was a firearms instructor when I got out of the military. Before that, as a kid, I studied martial arts, and my mother was a captain in the Army. She was a firearms instructor, so we started learning how to shoot guns at an early age. So I was involved in education related to firearms and tactics at a very early age. I joined the Army. I was an airborne paratrooper, and I enjoyed my time in the military, where I learned about discipline and structure and a lot about psychology of groups, how groups think. Being in an airborne unit versus a regular Army unit, I learned a lot about psychology, which helped me later on in life. But what I did was I came to Detroit, and I thought this would be a great place. After I got out of the military, I was a private investigator, and what I found was there was a gap between martial arts training and law, and so I wanted to create a school where you learn how to defend yourself but do it legally. And I remember New York City had a guy that taught the guardian angels, and I always looked up to them, and I thought that was a great organization as a kid. And I thought, wow, it's really great. They're going out there and they're protecting the people and helping people, and working with the police in New York City to help New York City be safe. And I always envied their structure and their would look to me at the time to be a group of structured people going out as civilians helping people. And that kind of always stuck with me. But what I really thought was, if people knew more about self-defense, how to legally defend themselves, they could avoid being prosecuted, they could avoid breaking the law, they could avoid lawsuits, and most importantly, they could avoid being killed if they knew how to defend themselves and do so legally. One thing I noticed as a private investigator was that laws apply to everything, but nobody knows the laws. You get taught the law by the police officers that respond to the scene and your attorney, and the outcome is determined by others. And so the point is, why are we not being taught law and tactics? So I created a school. So I started teaching in Detroit in 1994 how to defend yourself, understanding law and understanding how to defend yourself with a weapon and without a weapon, and how to make sure you're creating the best possible outcome while de-emphasizing violence. So very important is I always want to de-emphasize violence, but I still believed in righteous violence, meaning if someone violated you, you should be able to legally use force to then, shoot people or beat them up or whatever you want to do, but you had to do it legally as long as you follow the law, you'll be fine. And that's just not true. I've learned over the years. The reality is you need to avoid violence. And now, after many years, I teach differently. But what I did was I came to Detroit in 94, 95. I was teaching the parks. And then I noticed there was a story of a girl being chased off a bridge in front of a crowd of people. And they said the crowd was cheering as she was chased off a bridge and she died in front of her daughter. And she was pulled out of a car by some violent criminal individuals who were big, and the crowd could not stop them. Two men did jump off the bridge to try to help her, but nobody was able to help her. The two men did jump off a bridge after the woman jumped off of the bridge to save herself from this man with a crowbar who was over 300 pounds, over 6 feet tall. They just stripped her clothes off of her. And my point was, if somebody had training on that bridge, we could have prevented that occurrence. So the origin of why I started the organization is that I saw people needed help. It was not money. It was literally, I thought people needed help there. I'm from Ann Arbor, which is a college town. University of Michigan is there. The police are very polite, respectful, highly effective. I don't remember seeing any crime growing up in Ann Arbor. I just never saw that. So when I came to Detroit, I thought, my goodness, all we need is to train the citizens on how to talk to police officers, how to respond to police, how to protect themselves all at the same time. So I created a school for that. And then it turns out I was wrong again. The perspective of the police I encountered in Detroit was different than the police where I came from in Ann Arbor. The police in the city in Detroit were fixated more on prosecution than on protection. Some officers were protection oriented. Those were more like community service officers, but a lot of the officers were responding to situations like gunshots, injured people, people that have been victims of violent crime. A lot of times they were more interested in the actual prosecution phase rather than the protection phase. And so as a result, I realized there's a huge gap. And I filled that gap by focusing on how to stop the home invasions that were occurring 24 hours a day in the community I lived in, which is on the east side of Detroit. It was really near the mayor, about 250 yards from the mayor's house. But where this was considered what the police and the citizens both called crack alley. So I lived in the front buildings on a major street, but all the buildings behind mine, which was about 400 dwellings, was a very violent place. And I realized this because it's because we weren't preventing. We weren't focused on prevention. There was no one out there to stop injuries and deaths. There was no one literally physically there before while someone's screaming for help to stop the situation from happening. And so I created an organization. It just started off with just me and a guy and one of my students, a dog and a rifle. And I really thought, okay, we just need to protect these buildings. So I went and got the legal right to protect the buildings by being hired as security for the buildings. And the building owner said to me when I first brought it up, he said, no, I'm not interested in protecting these people. I'm interested in making money. And right now I'm not making any money because the occupancy is so low because of all the crime. I said, well, give me 6 months, give me a free apartment. He agreed. Give me a free facility so I can, in one of your buildings, so I can open a school. And he agreed to that. I said, give me one free apartment in each apartment building so I can put people from the community in those apartments in exchange for protecting the building. He agreed to that. We got rid of all the home invasions and murders within 6 months, and he was prospering. So he didn't still agree with my concept of helping the families. He wasn't concerned with that. He was really positively affected by the prosperity that occurred once we stopped the home invasions and murders. And during that time period, I met a lot of good officers that were very supportive of us. We worked with them, and it's because the police and us were working together to create the safety that was required that the criminal element simply left that one square block where they have been terrorizing the families and the businesses for decades. And we did it without violence. So what I was able to do was use a lot of psychology to change the behavior. We made the criminal element believe there was no opportunity. It is through opportunity denial, the perception of the opportunity denial, that we're able to change the belief system. So they simply left the community, left the families. They didn't go far. They went 1 or 2 blocks over. But in the community that I was protecting, the 10 buildings, 400 families, and the building owners there, they began to prosper. And so did all the other businesses. So what I have been able to do is replicate that process. The more we create safety for the people, the more prosperity for the wealthy occurs. So everyone's a winner. And then the police responses to that area went down hundreds of percent, like it was 300% decrease in 911 calls and emergency calls to the local precinct. And so the police commander was very supportive of that outcome. So we have a great relationship as a result of that because there was no negatives. At the end of the day, we found a way to understand law, use psychology, not violate people's rights, and create the conditions for violence to not occur. We weren't focused on capturing, caging, or possibly killing people out of some legal need to kill someone, which is a common occurrence in thought process of people today, especially a lot of people that are carrying guns. They are looking for ways to cultivate a condition to legally justify the use of force. And what we do is don't do that, because at the end of the day, there is nothing positive about the use of force and violence on people. And once we connect the people that are providing protection with that concept, once they believe, hey, the real win here is when I don't have violence, there's no loss, there's no injury, no death. Once I create that idea, then I can replicate that and as an individual and as a group. And that's what we see is that there are many police officers now, after 26 years, that have come back with great stories of how they use the training to subdue someone, take someone, to subjugate someone without injury, where they normally would have used extreme force in these different conditions. So ultimately, at the end of the day, our paradigm shift is that the police and the people need to work together to focus on creating an environment which is protected, so that both the police and the people are both in a positive situation, and both can appreciate each other, because the more people you have, the more money you have for taxes the police need. And I used to say that to police officers when I first started in the 90s. I was like, if the citizens leave, how are we going to have the money for the municipal payments for the officers? And the officers' pay dropped here significantly when the citizenry. So the population directly affects police pay. And I believe that if we protect the people more, we will see that the tax base increases and police pay increases. And the more safe the police are, the more safe we all are. So prosperity and protection are related.
Very good. And I want to turn to Detective John Baeza. You and I have talked before, but give people a little bit of a background as to how you came about wanting to become a police officer, and then how you kind of had a change of heart where you had a different perspective that you now articulate in the public square.
Well, thanks, Dave. And I agree with Dale's motto. I like it a lot. I've heard a lot about him. I've listened to podcasts and Dale being on the podcast, and it was very good. But I'll start just with my story so people can know. I have a family full of law enforcement officers in the New York City Police Department and firefighters in the New York City Fire Department. I had wanted to go on to be a police officer like my grandfather, and I did eventually do that, and I was able to get his shield number. It was a family thing, so that's why I became a police officer. I did spend 2.5 years as a New York State correction officer at Sing Sing Correctional Facility, which is a maximum correctional facility for very severe offenders. We had murderers in there and people that were predicate felons, violent felons against people. And I spent 2.5 years there working on my verbal skills, because we had a nightstick, we didn't have a gun. And back then we didn't even have, in 1984, we didn't even have the OC pepper spray. So you learn how to use your voice to get situations under control. So then I went on to the New York City Police Department, and you're talking about 1987, and I went on patrol in the 32nd precinct in Harlem. Now, in this particular precinct, it's less than 1 square mile, and there were probably, when I was there, 70 to 80 homicides per year in that less than 1 square mile. In fact, 26 officers had lost their life in the line of duty in that precinct, which is by far the most of any precinct in New York City. I just happened to get stationed there, and I'm glad I did. I learned a lot. But I worked with a bunch of cops back in '87 who were very much, it was much different than the mentality now back then. Back then, it was more of a, if you wrestled a guy with a gun to the ground, everybody loved it. you were a hero. The other cops thought you were great. Nowadays, it's changed to shoot first, ask questions later, and a much more militaristic, police force. When I went and I became an undercover, and that doesn't mean plain clothes. I mean real undercover, where they take your ID, they change it. You're out of the department computer. The only thing you really receive is a paycheck. I did that for 3 years, and at first, I loved it. It was great being an actor and so forth. But having had my life on the line, I nearly lost my life in my last buy, and that was the last buy I ever made. After that buy, I don't know why, I had an epiphany, and I realized that this drug war is not, it's a war against people. It's not what we need to do. And I had the opportunity to go to a drug enforcement task force, which was, considered an elite squad at that time. But I said, no, I don't want to go there. I asked to be transferred to the best place I thought where victims were, which was the Manhattan Special Victims Squad. It used to be called the Sex Crime Squad. And we investigated child abuse cases and rape cases, serial rape cases, sexual homicides, so forth. And that is where I really got my good grasp of how to do police work, how to know the law, like Dale was saying before, how to know the law so that your case is solid, how to know how to interview people. And interviewing is another thing. People think that detectives, you got to yell at people. I have seen it not work once, never. I've seen old-time homicide guys go in and yell at people, and they never get an answer. So what I would do is I would be nice to people. I would speak to them. And even the most hardened of criminals would give me confessions. Now, I'm not perfect, but I had a very good confession rate. And also, I was very hyper aware to false confessions because I didn't want to feed anybody any information. Now, I can't say that all the other detectives felt like that, but I did, because I treated somebody. I think Dale might have said this in a podcast somewhere, but this is important. You have to treat your victim as if they're your mother, your father, your sister, your brother, your son, your daughter, on a level where you're going to go and do everything you can legally to find the actual real offender of the crime. Right. So for 6 years, I did that at Special Victims Squad. And then I went on later, after I retired from the NYPD with my pension, I went down to Florida and I worked 3 years with a sheriff's office there. Now, during those 3 years, I decided to myself that I was going to be the most libertarian cop I could possibly be, knowing the ideology and everything. I never gave out, first of all, in my whole career, I never gave out a speeding ticket. When I was at this sheriff's office, I never made one drug arrest, but I was number 2 in the number of arrests that were made in the district. And that was because I was arresting people for violent felonies. I investigated my crimes, and also the warrants, the outstanding warrants that we had for predicate violent offenders. They would just sit there because the warrant squad worked only 9 to 5, which is not when you're going to find these offenders. So at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, when I was working, I take a list. Everybody who had a nonviolent crime was off my list. And on my list was people with just violence against people crime. Great. And I went out and I make 2, 3 arrests per shift just for that. Now, the other arrests, I would make domestic violence arrests because you're on those calls, but I never did make one drug arrest. I resigned honorably, but I think I got out at the right time, because what would happen is, even though I was doing things the right way and the way I thought they should be done, I probably could have gotten a little bit of hot water. If I tell somebody, hey, throw the drugs down the drain or the sewer, or throw them away and come on over here and look at my real bad guys and tell me if you know any of them from the neighborhood. So that's how, in a nutshell, that's a very small nutshell, but that's basically how it worked. And now I'm an expert witness in police work, and I do mainly police misconduct cases, not because I asked for them, because that's what they come forth with. And quite frankly, in all the cases I've ever had, I've only had to turn 2 down in which the police were correct. Or in one case, I believe, my personal opinion, I believe the medical examiner was wrong and he was a hired gun. And anyway, that's how I feel. I go by principles. And I just want to say, before I finish, I just want to say, Dale, I think you're doing a great thing. I think it needs to be done. I am at the end of the day, I am all for, I know you probably don't like this terminology, private policing, but private security, whatever the case may be, I'm all for that, because guess what? If they went to private investigations, and I know how to do my investigations, and I'm allowed to do investigations on rapes and stuff like that, child abuse cases, I know I'm good at it. I mean, I'm not the best out there, but I know I'm good at it. So I'm going to get hired. I'm going to make money at it, and I'm going to do my best. If that was the system, but it's not. But Dale, you seem to have a real good system going. So I'll let you speak.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your support.
You're welcome.
It means a lot. It means a lot when expert, good police officers supportive of what is clearly a good message for all of us. I'm on the side of what's right after I've seen it so many years, as you've seen from your experience. There's the narrative that we're all exposed to from TV and movies and the news, which is not real. And I actually thought the news was telling the truth, because I thought it was research. I looked at the news as they must have checked that story. They never checked the story, I found out. And that's why I really want to be the bridge between, I want the system to become the bridge between where we are and where we need to go. All it is knowledge. I think if people knew more, and I've seen this where I've been able to explain things that I found out the hard way through learning that my whole entire thought process was wrong. I really believed that, some narratives that are just not true. The poor people do the stealing. Well, there's lots of poor people, they never steal. And the rich people I've met are the biggest thieves. So that's just one example. And then, the idea that, and that's why I'm really against collectivism, whether it's colors of people or police people or anything. If we just use truth, we can get through a lot of foolishness, especially from the past. But my point is that we need to the reason why we need to have public policing and working with private is because the private sector, number one, is not insulated in the way you would need to be insulated in a situation psychologically or financially from the enforcement of laws. So I look at it as three things. Protection is one thing, policing is a separate thing, and protection is a separate thing. And so when we look at law enforcement itself, you need law enforcement. Someone has to enforce laws for the society to stay together. There's no way you can have a society without people that are going to enforce the law. Now, protection is how you keep the laws from being broken. If we wait and allow things to get out of control, it will happen. There will be laws broken. So we need to educate the people. Then we need to be there ahead of time to encourage them not to break the law and create conditions positively for people to not do the things that are going to get them locked up in the first place. And I've seen that work very well. And I've got a lot of kids come back to me with great stories of how a speaking engagement I did with them, or some lesson I taught to them in some random place, and they came back as adults and told me that they helped them make better decisions later. And some of them were adults that went down the wrong path and then heard me say some things that changed their way of thinking. And that's when I learned that your words do matter. What you say to people does matter. So say positive things, talk about how to create positive, and don't let negative things occur. Why do you want to see what the police officers did wrong when we can just train them to do things right and they don't get in trouble, they don't get locked up? Producing more video evidence against police is not in the best interest of the police or the public, really. So what we need to do is change, in my opinion, we need to change the position. Teaching police officers to be the hero. Teaching police officers to celebrate heroic police officers. Teaching police officers to become protectors. Literally making a transition from prosecutorial policing to protective policing. And why that's vital is because that's also mentally healthy for the officer and their family. It's vital to be that person in society when people look at them and say, oh, here's my protectors. They're here. They already feel that initially until there's a bad experience. And that bad experience is really not, are there bad police? I'm sure there are. But let's say that the majority of the negative context just comes from the disconnect that people think police are supposed to be working for them as their private worker. The police are for the public. Their job is to protect and serve the law for the public in maintaining public order. That does not mean you don't go to jail if you're the one that broke the rules and you were the one that called You broke the law, you called the police, that means you have to go to jail. So the fact that what I've run across, people say, well, I called the police, why am I in trouble? Because you broke the law. It doesn't matter that you're the one that called, or because when the police got there, what you did was illegal. That's another thing that people don't know. They don't know that there's certain things you can't say and do. And if you do, there's going to be repercussions. You can't get mad at the police for doing that job. And they do. And so what I do is I use this, the private sector as the buffer. I get to tell people, hey, citizen, neighbor, customer of mine, please don't do that. The police are going to arrest you if you do that. What do I mean? Here's an example. A homeowner says, I don't like these individuals walking down my street, taking pictures of my house in the middle of the night. It was 1 o'clock in the morning. 2 young men are walking down the street, taking pictures in the middle of the street. So he says, I'm going to kill them. I'm going to get my Glock and I'm going to shoot them. So we told the homeowner, we're not going to let you shoot the kid, the 20, they're in the 20s, right? And we're not going to let you shoot the kids. You're not going to shoot the 20-year-old young man. It's not going to happen. He said, but I pay you. I'm the homeowner association. I'm on the board and I want to shoot them. And they're taking pictures of my house and taking pictures of our neighborhood at 1 o'clock in the morning. I said, sir, you live on a public street. There's no law that they're breaking. That's number one. Number two, criminals do not walk down the middle of the street and take pictures of beautiful homes. Sir, you live in a beautiful home. He's taking pictures at night because you live in a beautiful home, and they'll do it during the daytime too. It's what they do. It turns out these kids were, what they stated was that they were in college and they're taking pictures for architecture. It is 1 o'clock in the morning. That is a weird time, but their license plate is not hidden. They parked the vehicle out in the open. They were literally walking openly down the street, not being surreptitious, not being secretive in any way. Their behavior was normal. When approached by security and we said, how you guys going today? We just talked to them. They told us, oh, we're just walking down the street. Some guy was just yelling at us. And make a long story short, he appeared with his gun to shoot the kids. And my team member had to go forward and tell him to put the gun back and go home. So imagine if we thought with our guns, or if we thought at that time we were carrying. Imagine if we thought, I can legally justify the use of force now because this homeowner is pulling a gun, which he is. He's exposing the gun. He's coming towards us in an aggressive way. He's threatening to shoot the young men. If my team member was trained in traditional ways of thinking, he would have shot the homeowner and legally justifiable. Of course, we still would be sued, of course. But ultimately, do you really think that people want in their community a service they're paying for that shoots their neighbors? They don't want that. I can assure you, they would not agree that it was okay for us to shoot one of the neighbors, even though it was legally justifiable. So I created a system so that you can manage that threat in a better way, which is to not think with your gun, is close the gap, be in a position biomechanically to actually take the gun from them if you needed to, and then use psychology to join with this person to get them to believe that the best thing to do is to not shoot anyone at all. And we protected the young man and got them out of there. And what's interesting is the narrative. I say to people, I actually use this story on Facebook, and I said everything I just said to you. And I said, why do you think that the wealthy man with this in a beautiful neighborhood thought he could shoot these young men in his neighborhood at 1 o'clock in the morning? And some people, they said, well, because in Detroit, right? So we're in Detroit. Why would this wealthy man think he can come out and shoot these young men, these college students? And he said, and people were responding, going, well, because he's white and he's rich, and there's black kids coming down the street. I said, I never said anything about any colors. I never mentioned any color scheme whatsoever. It turns out this is an African-American homeowner, and these are European-American males from a suburban city. And they didn't think about the fact that it's 1 o'clock in the morning. They were not nefarious in any way. So our mindsets have been affected by years of cultivated social constructs that have to be removed from all facets of our life, but it affects our private sector and our public sector as well. And my point in saying all that is that it's public safety in the communities is very difficult. And so what we have to do is change our thought process to create a positive interaction between police and the public. And one of those ways is to encourage police to become more protection-oriented than prosecution-oriented. And so as a result, the people will be more appreciative, more positive with that mindset. And I've seen it happen personally where the community views any concept of structure as offensive, what it shouldn't be, because the only reason you have what you have is the perception that police exist. Even if you never see police around you, around your neighborhood, the reason your life is the way it is now is because people believe that are criminals, that the police will come here. Whether that's true or not, the fact that criminals believe it means a lot. And I didn't know that until I went to Hurricane Katrina and brought a team down the first weekend that the Shep Smith said you could go to Hurricane Katrina, you can go down to Katrina, and you can help these people because no one's getting water from the government. There's no one helping, and the people need water and they're dying. And so I took a team down there the first weekend, and what I saw changed me. I realized that everything we have is based upon the idea that the police will come. There's a law enforcement entity. You believe they're going to be law enforcers when they get there. You don't believe they're going to be policing. You believe they're going to come there to enforce laws to protect you. That's what you believe. And that is what we need to have. And I know that because when I went to Hurricane Katrina, I saw everyone become tribal. And the African-American gangs attacked African-American people. The European Americans formed a militia called the Algiers Point Militia. And they were on camera admitting to shooting people that were unarmed randomly. Police departments became tribal in their areas. The different parishes locked down their communities and were very vehemently protecting their bridges in their area. And it was a terrible mess. But what did stop the Algiers militia, what did stop this group of radical racist individuals from going house to house was a multicultural group. African Americans, European Americans, they were armed, they came together, they formed a community collective, and they blocked them out of their community. So the reality is the police and law enforcement entity was not effective there at that moment, that first weekend. As a result, total chaos. And there was no way you can survive under those conditions. And my point is that once I saw that, I then realized what the real psychological implications are of not having protectors or people you believe you can call to come protect you is total mayhem. And then I experienced it here in Detroit when our lights went out as well. The community was unsafe. And that's because police were incapable of answering 911 calls because the 911 call system went down. So there was a lot of calamity that was not reported because, again, there was no power. So I know because my staff lived in Detroit. Half my staff lived inside Detroit, half lived outside the city. The ones who were outside the city could come to work. The ones who were inside the city had to protect their neighborhood, their families, just because they had no power. My point is, we need to have protective policing so we can have the society we all need to be safe and prosperous. And the reason why it needs to be government sector working with private sector is because when this government sector person comes to enforce these laws, these rules, you shouldn't be able to threaten his contract and threaten his ability to protect his family. And that's exactly what happens when you do something the community does not agree with. And police officers often have to do things that they would not normally do, or with that particular community would not want the police officer to do. And if the police officer is following the law, he would do those things. He would arrest that person, even though in this community he is liked. He is supported by many. And it's imperative to have that separation because the private sector can't do that. I can be threatened. My contracts can be removed. If someone doesn't like my staff members, I have to fire them. And as a result, that what they don't like about them could be anything or nothing. I mean, it's just when you have a police department that works for the state, that works for the government, what you essentially have is a buffer where the individual family of influence can't normally take away your ability to have that contract. And that's what will happen in the private sector. And I think it's wrong when we expect private sector policing. For example, in Michigan here, there was a doctor who was doing inappropriate things to girls for many years. The police knew about this. There were reports. The police at Penn State had the similar situation with one of their donors. If a police department at a school does something that's destructive to the school, it destroys their own income. So I'm not saying that they didn't do the right thing. I'm just saying that for us to expect the the police at the university to do something that could destroy their economic ability to survive is perhaps not realistic. And so rather than blame Penn State police or Michigan State police, let's look at the reality that if they were to prosecute and destroy the football team of Penn State early on, then the winningest football coach wouldn't have had all those years. And then at Michigan State, the lawsuits and the shutdown of their program would have happened many years before. And so I agree that it should have happened. They should have been shut down earlier. That should have been stopped. However, that's not realistic. I don't work there, so I'm not going to be affected. My retirement's not going to be affected by what happens at that university. My point is that those police officers, just like people in the military, when you have to speak up and you speak out, you're literally at risk of losing everything. And in the case of New York Police Department with Serpico, that's a prime example. He spoke up. He was, a straightforward police officer. Just wanted to protect the people, wanted to be a law enforcement officer, a professional, and things did not work out well for him. So at the end of the day, we need to protect police that have integrity. We need to protect and promote them and their families. And the sooner we do that, the sooner our society is going to be safer and more successful for everyone.
Lieutenant Baeza, any thoughts?
Well, I know I agree with what Dale says, and I also agree. I think he had said something in another program. I listened to a couple of podcasts, and I think you were talking something about knowing the law, police knowing the law. Yes, and that is something that I prided myself in while I was especially while I was a detective in New York City, and then when I worked down in Florida for 3 years, I had to know a whole new system. But what I did was not only did I get the Florida, they give you a book and here's the regulations. I would look up the legal guidelines. I would also look up the criminal jury instructions that are handed to the district attorneys. So I knew that I had enough whenever I was going to make an arrest on something. I knew that I had all the elements that were needed. But one thing, an example I'd like to give you is this. When I went on the New York City Police Department, and even now to this day, it's still the same, is we had a department rule where you could be fired. And this was the situation, and everybody knew it. Everybody knew it. If somebody was in a vehicle and they were using only the vehicle to attempt to hurt you, like run you over, you are not allowed in New York City to shoot that vehicle unless there's a firearm inside that vehicle and they're using the firearm to threaten you. If it's a car, we always used to say, get out of the way. It's not that difficult to get out of the way. I'm not saying it's it always in every situation, but you would be, I'd probably be horrified at the amount of times since I was on the job until now, until cases I still get now, where police officers will not lose their job, but they will end up shooting into a car where they just could have they were out of the way already, or they could have gotten out of the way. There was not a danger to them at all. The car was going at slow speed and they shot the individual in the car. So what's happening to me, what I've seen happening is a mindset of police has become more militaristic, where, the firing of a gun used to be, we used to say, I go 20 years without firing a gun. Now, I've had 4 times in my career where I've almost been killed, 2 times where I've almost been shot. And thankfully I haven't, but in those instances, I had a chance, and I'll describe one, if you don't mind, in an instance. When I was in working on patrol in Harlem, we had a call, and I was on patrol. We had a call with a man with a gun. When we got to the scene, my partner saw a guy had a gun out. He was putting it in his pants pocket. And of course, back then in New York, everything's illegal. Guns are illegal. And you think, whatever. So you're taking a gun off the street. So anyway, I took off after the guy, ran through back alleys in Harlem, which is piled 2-3 feet high with just dirty diapers and garbage and everything. And I was in good shape then, but I ended up cornering the guy. He turned around, he pointed his gun at me. And what happened was he pulled the trigger. We know that because there was a primer mark on the firing pin. He pulled the trigger, and I dove for cover underneath. I don't know what it was, just a bunch of garbage, I guess. It's not really cover. But when I got up and I got my eyes back on him, he had his gun pointed at me, but I could tell it was jammed. So in that split second, I made a decision, and I give my father all the credit for this, because he taught me how to make decisions and he taught me how to do the right thing. I knew that it wasn't the right thing to shoot this kid because his gun had jammed. Now I'm going to shoot him. No, that wasn't the case. And thankfully, I didn't have to shoot him, handcuffed him. Yeah, he was later arrested for something else. But anyway, long story short, he was arrested for attempted murder of a police officer. And that was me.
Got and that happens a lot. That actually happens a lot. And that's what I think, those kind of stories is what people are missing. That story is exactly what people need to hear. That's true. That actually happens more often than the other. But they're acting like from CNN that the police officers are always shooting, when in fact they're still rarely shooting in comparison to situations like you just had. That's a great story.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I mean, those are similar situations. Another situation I had with a very, very one of the most highly decorated police officers who worked in my precinct, which is the 32nd precinct in Harlem. He was working as anti-crime plainclothes, not undercover, but plainclothes. Everybody in the neighborhood knew they were the police anyway. But anyway, they pulled up and they pulled on into an unlicensed cab. And when the guy got out, he turned and he shot a friend of mine in the belt buckle. And the belt buckle, it just pierced his skin a little bit, didn't kill him, or didn't. And do you know how his team reacted? They were right there, the anti-crime team. They ran and tackled the guy and got the gun out of his hand. They didn't shoot him. They could have all fired shots at him,
right?
But they didn't. And back then, these were our heroes. These guys brought me up. Right. These are my heroes. So back then, I looked up to these guys. That was a great thing. That was an honorable thing to do.
Let me just say this. That's going above and beyond. That's literally going above and beyond to preserve life. And that's what people need to hear. That's the story, those stories, and there's lots of them.
And we do that, but we also have a situation out there. And Dale, I think you've probably seen this because you teach self-defense and so forth to law enforcement officers, and you've done this so for a long time. But what I know is the training that we get on self-defense and less self-defense, yes, should be more, of course, especially when you're a martial artist, you would think that, right? But right. But verbal communications.
Right.
The New York City Police Department dabbled for a while in verbal judo, which was George Thompson. I don't know if you heard of that, yeah. But people think it sounds funny, but you know what? It worked. And I took a course when I went down to Florida. I ended up down here in New York. You couldn't take a course; they wouldn't pay for you to go to anything. But in Florida, you could take a course. So I took a verbal judo instructor course, and let me tell you something. It meant, I mean, I was doing pretty good as it was, but I thought everybody should take this course. Everybody should have be immersed in how to speak to everybody else, not just verbal judo, that quote unquote that his book, but that style of non-violent communication, de-escalation. What do you think about that, Dale?
Absolutely, and that's what I teach. And that's where people don't understand. We stopped carrying guns in 2017 because we didn't need to. The reality is, if you understand psychology of humans and predatory behavior, you can create nonviolent outcomes. I didn't say we don't take people into custody, because we do. We have to, because they've committed crimes, and we have to hold them for the police. You know how we hold them? By telling them to sit down. We can tackle them. We just don't. We tell them to sit down. If they believe you and they trust it and believe that you're not going to hurt them, and they believe they can't get away, we do both those simultaneously by how we dress, which is ultra paramilitary, but tactical, but not military, but extremely safe looking. We wear a lot of motorcycle gear. So it looks like padded arms like you use for motocross, like riot gear perhaps, but it's motorcycle gear. So we don't wear actual military clothing. We wear very athletic clothing that's structured strong. And at night, you'll see our guys, if there's conflict, they'll have a helmet on, a full face motorcycle helmet. And as a result, the criminal doesn't feel like there's a good opportunity to attack, and they should leave. And the times we don't let them leave and we have them detained is if the homeowner wants to prosecute them, or if someone gets hurt, then they got to wait for the police. So in those physical situations. And and there's no extenuating circumstance. Like I had a situation where a woman was being abducted, and the woman was, she kicked her way out of the car. He grabbed her back in the car, choked her in the back seat, had her on the ground behind the back seat. Got called 20 calls from residences, and we make them call 911 before they call us, and we tell them again they have to call 911. And when we come to a situation, we call 911 as well. When I got to the scene, there was nobody at the car because the guy had her body underneath the seat, and he was hiding in the back seat as well on the floorboard. So when I came back and circled back, I got contact with him, got the girl out of the car with words, and then asked him to leave and told him the police are on the way, he should leave now. And he agreed, and I got the girl into my vehicle and got her safe. The objective, and I heard people that criticized me, they said, well, why don't you take the guy into custody? My job is to save the girl's life. If that was my sister, if that was my mother, you to protect her. The police will get him. We got his license plate. She knows him as an ex-boyfriend who was going to abduct and kill her. Remember that 9 out of 10 women are killed by who? Someone they know, an acquaintance, like an ex-boyfriend or husband. That's what this was going to be. He was going to murder her. So there's no problem with the police coming together, find a search warrant, go get him and take him to custody and put him in prison. That's going to happen, and that did happen. But the female, I don't want to be in a situation where she, what if he does pull out a gun and we start fighting, and even if I win, she gets shot in the process? Or what if I did lose? What if he got lucky and I somehow perished? Now he still gets the girl and I'm dead. So at the end of the day, if I can get him to leave without having contact, I'm a winner, she's a winner. And the community, guess what they didn't have? Nothing in the news about this murder, abduction, or anything happening in the neighborhood. As a result, their property values didn't go down. So everybody is happier, more successful. The police are going to get the guy. They got him, by the way. So you can escalate or you can de-escalate situations from onset, from actually how you approach it. Our objective is to make sure people are safe. When police officers are having a problem arresting someone, we don't stand there. We go help that person get safely into custody. You don't have to let the officer go into a situation where they're having trouble and they end up injuring the person. The person's got to go to jail anyway. Whatever the problem is going to be worked out in court. So hurry up and help the officer get the person safely in custody or persons. We have situations where the police officer gets surrounded. One was a murder suspect. Border Patrol was taking someone into custody, and he was taking one of 15 men. The other 14 guys started surrounding the officer, and I guess he thought, because we're private sector, we're going to allow this. So we came over there, pushed the men back, surrounded the officer, and let him get this murder suspect into his vehicle. And so citizens need to know that, number one, they should be protecting what's in their best interest, which is the keeping of people alive and safe. And that's everyone. That's the people and the police. When we don't let a criminal get killed, get injured, or we don't let a person get injured during the subjugation process, we have helped the officer. Most importantly, we helped that family, because now the officer didn't have to hurt the person, and we created an outcome that's positive. So creating conditions where violence does not occur is what's best. So rather than figuring out a way to argue on the street, for example, we teach people how to comply with police officers. You realize that nobody ever teaches how to comply. That's not a class. How can you comply if no one taught you? Who taught you what to do and what not to do? So what we do is, it's a two-pronged approach. One is I teach police officers how to identify de-escalation and how to produce that trust bond. Normal people will not comply with police direction or directives if they're in fear. That's because neurologically, subconsciously, we are not supposed to respond or positively when we're in fear. So what I teach with police officers specifically is how to approach and to de-escalate by body language. How you approach has a lot to do with how they interpret you. And when they approach and they see the police officer is not aggressive, they tend to not respond aggressively. That's humans. That's human behavior 101. So we call it mirroring, projecting. When you approach someone, you mirror their behavior. And by mirroring, what happens is they see you as themselves. And you keep it positive, right? You join, mirror, and placate. You join their side of the argument. The guy says, oh, she made me mad. You don't come up and say, well, law says you can't hit a girl. You come up, you put your arms around him and say, what did she do to you, sir? Come on over here. Then you get in biomechanical control of his elbows and you put him in custody. Next thing you know, he's like, hey, I thought you were on my side. Meanwhile, there's no fight. There's no violence. You can create that biomechanically and psychologically by creating a bridge, a bond of trust. So when the police officer approaches and is calm, and I saw this in real life, how people are responding to police officers has a lot to do with how the police officer projected. So once police officers are projecting positives, that's why you see stories of officers who are very professional. They have no problems their whole career. And you're like, wow, how come we send this one guy to a scene, no problems? This other guy goes to a scene, lots of problems. A lot of it has to do with how they treat people. So police officers that treat people like family, or like they respect the person as though they are like a family member, they tend to have less violent conflicts and adversarial interactions. And with citizens, people that are not police officers, they have to understand that you have to see things from the right perspective too. But what is compliance? Compliance is not really your opinion. Compliance is based on the officer's opinion. So you have to make sure the officer knows that you're not going to be a problem. You don't need to have dominance established upon you. You need to hurry up, establish the officer. Not only do I respect your authority in this situation as relates to law enforcement, I'm going to show you that up front. So don't say things that are confrontational to police officers. Why are you being confrontational in the first place? There's no reward. There's no reward for having verbal or physical confrontation with an officer. There's nothing you're going to win. So what do you want to do really? What you really want to do is have a good quality of life. Well, you can't have that having conflict with law enforcement officers. So once you establish that, you need to have a non-eventful interaction. You can stop any concept of having a conflict-oriented conversation. So keep it positive, respectful, speak up loud and clear, be respectful in your tonality, voice inflection, facial expression. Those things are not being taught. How do you stand? So one of the things we teach little kids is rule number 1, never run. Rule number 2, show your hands. And we show them like to hold their hands in front of their body, not up like this. Just hold their hands in front of their body, in the middle of their body. And to greet the officer with a smile, hello, sir, how are you today? And guess what? Some little girls who were 11 years old were at a shooting situation in Detroit where some gang of kids were shooting around the roller rink. Some calls were made to the police. A little girl who attended one of my classes that was at her school, she's 11 years old. She said that she was with 3 other girls. She told them not to run like the other kids were running when the police arrived. The police arrived in approximately 6 cars, and she told her friends to stand here, hold their hands like this, and don't run. And so the police officers are yelling at all the kids to get on the ground. They don't know who's got the gun. They're coming to a gun call. They see kids running all over the place, hundreds of kids. They don't know who's doing what. They are yelling, they have their guns out, and they tell everyone to get on the ground. The kids are traumatized, freaking out. Kids are screaming, getting on the ground. The officers don't know which kid has a gun. It turns out the kids with the guns left 20 minutes ago, but nobody could tell them that because everyone's screaming. So the police officers were rushing to the scene. It looked scary to the kids, so the kids started running randomly, just in all different directions. So that's what the police officer would see is running around, going to a gunshot situation. So they have all the kids get on the ground. When they saw the little 11-year-old girl that I trained, they saw her and her friends, they said, okay, you four don't have to get on the ground. What happened here? And started talking to them, and they were able to communicate. And that showed that you can de-escalate the situation just by underreacting. If she would have ran around, the girls would have ran around screaming, then the cops would have also had no choice but to look at everyone as a possible threat. And so what if we teach kids that how to de-escalate through their behavior, police officers that are approaching them? And that's where we have to teach adults as well, especially, right? So both adults and children need to know, how do you explain to a police officer by your body language, you have no negative intent or will towards them or anyone else? And when in a traffic stop, for example, we teach that everyone should have their driver's license, registration, insurance out in the middle of their car or up on their dash, already ready to go. Even if you never get stopped, just have it there anyway. And as a result, if you ever do get stopped, you dive over to the side, to the right, dive over. I mean, get over as quickly as possible. And then turn your car off, put your driver's license, registration, insurance, and everything out of the window with your hands open. As a result of doing that, you've done 3 things. Number 1, you've taken away the ability for the officer to feel the sense that you're trying to evade them in any way, because you got over so quickly. You established dominance for the officer immediately. He saw you pull over. She saw you pull over right now. If you wait, there's an anxiety, there's a there is going to be an escalation from within most officers will think, well, why are you not pulling over right now? So you need to pull over as quickly as possible, calmly, but quickly. And when you put your windows down, driver's license, registration, insurance, and keys out of the car, you've taken away all of the points of contact for conflict. And as a result, what I've seen happen is police officers are extremely positive and say, you know what, put your hands back in the car, it's fine. It's not a big deal. Well, you ran a light or what's going on, and it's over, and they're out of it. In fact, the officers are extra nice because because the person was so advanced compliant that that's what we call it, advanced compliance. What happens is there's nothing to say, why'd you do that? What'd you do this? You reach over there, grab that. You remove all of that by simply doing it up front. It's also going to be on the cameras, on their body cam. It's going to be on the cameras of the cars, and the witnesses are going to see your hands. So it's all the way around positive for everyone that you show that. And as a result, you just don't have the escalation from the officers having possible fear that there could be something else going on here. And as a result of that positive projection, you're able to de-escalate the situation before it escalates, which is very important. So we teach a lot about psychology, which is how we're able to create non-adversarial interactions for nonviolent outcomes.
Detective Baeza, do you have similar experiences in that vein?
Yeah, well, definitely. But it's sad that it's come to this where we do have to tell people how to be compliant and so forth. I'm really sad from the days. I'm not saying every decade before was always better, but I'm really sad for those days where police were really looked up as friendly, and they aren't anymore by anybody. I don't care what color you are, yellow, white, green, black, whatever. It's still a fear. And you know what? Retired cop or not, when you see a cop next to you nowadays, you still get a little tense. You get a little anxious because you see what happens sometimes. So I think what Dale said was really good. But communication too, also on another level, where I've seen it really explode here is with emotionally disturbed people. And I always point out there's a scene in the Fort Apache, the Bronx, with Paul Newman. And there's a scene where there's a guy with a knife. He slashed somebody in the movie, and he's acting as he's threatening people with a knife. And Paul Newman comes up as a patrol officer, a New York City police patrol officer. And he puts his hat on backwards. He starts acting like a little bit crazy himself, and he reaches out and give me the knife, but real nice and slow. They give him the knife, and then everybody claps on the sidewalk and they arrest the guy. And that's how, but you know what? That does happen. That is one of the few instances that I see in a movie that I tell people look at, because I've gone up, and I'm going to give you an example in Florida, which is more modern day, in the 2000s when I was here. I arrived on the scene with my training officer. He knew I was a cop already, but we worked out together. And we arrived on a scene where there was a woman, and she was mentally disturbed, and she was obviously agitated and so forth. She was sitting by the side of the police car, and she wouldn't let them handcuff her. And when I looked, I saw there was about, 3 laser beam, from the taser, the red beams were pointed at her like they were going to tase her. So my training officer said, no, let my trainee take care of this. So I went in there and I knelt down next to her, and I kind of whispered in her ear. As Dale says, sometimes you got to use communication here. And I said, listen, don't worry about these hillbilly cops. I'm from New York. It's okay. I understand what's going on. I said, then she started listening. She was about my age. So then I told her a joke that works with people. Now I'm not going to swear on this podcast, but I'll tell you what the joke is, and you'll get it. I told her, I said, ma'am, have you ever watched Gilligan's Island? And she said, yeah, I've seen that story. Gilligan stuck on the island and everything. I said, you ever wonder to yourself, how was it that the professor could make a phonograph, a record player out of a coconut, but he couldn't fix a freaking hole in the boat? And she just started laughing because she knew the show. And then at that point, I said, you know what? Could you do me a favor? We need to get you to the doctor. You need to see somebody. How about if I put the handcuffs on you and I'll put you in the back, and they can take you over there. And she complied. There was not a problem with her. So using not only humor, not all the time, but using my first name. If you know the person's first name, use it. Stuff like that.
what I see in that story is that you created a trust bond. She knew you're not going to go through all that and then mistreat her. You know, you're not going to let her go, but you're also not going to hurt her. Once you are able to get the human being to see that, you can create compliance 99% of the time, even when they're mentally ill. You know, we that's why I'm glad you brought that up, because there seems to be this perspective that somehow when people are mentally ill, somehow that makes it worse. And we deal with mentally ill people in Detroit all the time. I mean, I would say 90% of the criminals we come across, would you call a criminal? They're just mentally ill people. They need hospitals. They don't really need to be in a jail cell. Okay, we're talking 9 out of 10. One of the situations, this just happened last summer. A guy goes to break into a house. He's pulling the door, and the homeowner says, "Stop pulling on my door." And he goes, "No, let me in." Just call me like that. "Let me in." He goes, "No, I'm not letting you in." And so when my team member pulled up, our response time was very quick. We already called 911. They're being advised, and the homeowner already called 911, and so did the alarm company. So when my team member pulls up, he sees our lights, because we always have our lights on when we pull up to anything at all times. We have white strobe lights on top of the car 24/7. So our customers can see us, and more importantly, the violent criminals can see us and stay away from us, which is what they do. They stay away from our communities. Okay, so they see the bright white lights from a mile away, and they just don't go to the community. They go to communities that don't have the bright white lights. So my team member pulls up, and the guy comes at my guy and says, "I'm Jesus." And my team member does exactly what I trained him to do. Instead of responding it's 3 o'clock in the morning, instead of responding in a aggressive way, says, "Okay, Jesus, please keep walking down the street. You're not allowed to go in someone's house, okay?" And he says, "Okay." And he starts walking down the street. And so we have to go check on the homeowner right now, okay? But our objective is to get the criminal off the property, right? This is public streets. It's not a private community. So now my team member starts following him down the street, calls 911, and because he's mobile, there's not going to be a mobile response. But he goes to another house, and tries to break into this house, and it's a 25,000 square foot home. And my team member says, comes across the same guy. He had broken away from our visual surveillance, and law enforcement in Detroit, the 911 operators do not send to mobile situations. So the part where the guy's walking on the street, even though he's 10 feet in front of our car, they're not going to come and get him now for whatever reason. So that's officially from the actual sergeant that is in charge. And I got his actual statement indicating we don't send to mobile situations. So when we go to the next location, because he was in the same neighborhood, tries to break into another house, my team member comes up to him and says, "Jesus, you have to sit down now." And he says, "Okay." So he sits down. He goes, "Well, why sit down?" He goes, "Because you're waiting for the police. The police are on the way." He goes, "Well, how long is the police going to take?" And our team member says, "Jesus, the police are already on the way. Just have a seat." So an hour goes by, and it's very busy. Apparently, the police cannot come there right now. So an hour goes by, and he's sitting on the ground, just no handcuffs, no nothing, just sitting on the ground. And then he says, "Can I go pet the deer?" Like, "No, sir, you can't go pet the deer. You're waiting for police." He says, "Okay." So finally, 2 hours goes by, and we say, "Okay, well, look, do you want to wait here for the police?" Which we can do all day if you want. It's been a couple hours, and the police station is approximately 500 meters from where we're standing. And our team members, this is what we do in these situations. We offer people a ride to the police station if they want a ride. So he says to them, "If you want to ride to the police station, we can give you a ride, or you can wait here for the police at this location." He says, "No, I'd rather have a ride." So we give him a ride to the police station, and then they take him to the hospital. It was just that simple. There's no fighting, there's no violence, no conflict. And this is 9 out of 10 of our situations for the past 10 years in communities of thousands of residents. So are there situations where there are actual violent criminals that have come through? Yes. And in one situation, we had a guy who was kicking on a door, and he was a real criminal, not a mentally ill person. This is a guy that you can tell had the probably a prison workout program in his background. And he was very aggressive, very assertive. My team members came to him and said, as we approached, he stopped kicking the door, started walking away. And And then, he kept walking. He said, go, leave, the police are on the way. So he leaves and goes on the street and takes off. The police did show up, and we informed him which way they went, and they went to look for him. I got asked the next day by the security for this executive, who obviously doesn't protect them at night, they protect them another time. And they have video surveillance on this home 24/7. This is a major corporation, president. And anyway, he he says to me, he says, well, why didn't you take the guy into custody instead of letting him go? I said, our job is to protect the family. The family is alive and safe. Our mission is done. The criminal went that way, and that job is law enforcement. So that's something separate. Having a shooting here, and we were armed at the time, having a shooting at that situation would not be in the best interest of the homeowner, would not be in the best interest of us. Shooting this person on that property, even though it's legal, he's armed, he's aggressive, he's violent, he's breaking into a home. We shoot this individual, that is not in the best interest of the community, is not in the best interest of their feeling of safety, knowing that there are people that are in shootouts at their homes. And at the end of the day, a private company does not want to be involved in a shooting. It's not in their best interest financially. So there's no win in a confrontation that creates violence when the police can simply go track this person down and take them into custody and adjudicate them in a more appropriate way, safer way, where there isn't a shooting. You can actually surround this house with SWAT team and take them into custody. Lots of options, but one of those options that's not good is creating death that's optional. And that's an example of creating an optional death. And then we didn't have any more break-ins or attempted break-ins from that individual or anyone else like that. We've been there 10 years, and that's just one community, one of the multiple communities. So the reality is our idea of violence is that needs to be replaced. First of all, when you look at people, you need to look at them as family. So if police officers do look at people as family, that's why they're not shooting. And that's why you didn't shoot, sir. You could have, you just decided not to. What if that was what if you were that kid's father? What if that was your cousin, your nephew? He shouldn't be shooting people, and definitely shouldn't be shooting you, and you wouldn't let a member of your family shoot you. But in that same situation, if that was your family member, with that story that you said, you would have tackled your nephew. You would have tackled the neighbor kid next door. You wouldn't have shot him because you saw the opportunity to not shoot him. That's all. You looked for an opportunity not to shoot. And you could change that, and it would be totally legal for you to shoot that kid in that story you had, but you saw the person as a person. And that's why it's vital for people to look at all people as family. When you look at a person who is like your family, then what happens is it changes your idea of what's appropriate and how you treat them, how to talk to them. You're not gonna let them hurt you, but at the same time, you're gonna find ways not to hurt them. The example I use is when you have a mentally ill grandparent who's grabbing a weapon at your house. And do you articulate why you had to shoot grandma because she grabbed a knife at Thanksgiving and was threatening someone? No, you find a way not to attack and kill, even though you can justify the shooting of your family member. You find a way not to do that. And that's what you're supposed to do in all situations. And I will say this, most police officers do that. They find a way not to shoot people. What we're doing through the media is we're hyper reporting several narratives that are completely false. And we need to stop doing that because it's going to be highly destructive. So one of the narratives is European American women are calling the police on African American people doing nothing wrong, and it's disproportionate, meaning it's constant and no one else is doing that. And that is false. African American women and men are calling the police on African American men and women way more, yet CNN doesn't care. So what they're doing is not reporting something and reporting only one other thing, which creates recency bias. So now you believe European American females are the ones calling 911 and African American females are not, would be your natural belief after that. Why would the news media report one thing but not report the other? And that is because we have to remember that the news media is not research. It is simply an organization that reports stories for ratings. They're not telling you severity, significance, or frequency of anything. So there's a much worse crime they didn't report because for whatever reason, I don't know what the reasons are. I did ask Chris Como and some other people in media, why are these news stories from cities? Why are we reporting all these news stories as though there's no crime in the rest of the state, no matter where you are? So in Detroit, We hear about crimes in Detroit. 99% of the newscasts about crime is Detroit stories, okay? That's every day for your whole life. However, the majority of violence and crime and murders in Michigan do not occur in Detroit. They occur outside Detroit. But if you were watching the news here, you would think all murders happen in Detroit. There's no one gets murdered outside Detroit. So if you're anywhere outside Detroit, you're safe, which is not true. And the FBI reported that no matter where you live in the United States, you're equally in danger. And that's because the FBI knows more than we know through actual data. And my point is this: if we tell the truth, if we teach reality, if we show the actual, if we would collect the actual information, if we were to make it mandatory to collect all information related to safety, then we would that would expose truth to us. From there, we would make truth, use the truth, not our feelings, to make decisions on what's best and what's not best. And the core of it, though, comes down to psychology, and not these narratives that we were taught that somehow are permeating news media, which also affects us as people.
Detective Baeza, I want to ask, do you think that the things that you and Dale are discussing are something that could be implemented internally within police, organizations around the world? Or would it have to be something like a company like Mr. Brown's model coming into these different cities that need this work? And then after you answer that, I want to ask Dale, how can you scale this? Obviously, you said you've done some of this in poorer communities, but how do you scale that?
We're rich communities.
What's that?
We're actually in the richest communities. 9 out of 10 of the things, 9 out of 10 of the communities, 99% of the people we're protecting are wealthy now. When I started, I was on the east side, but now it's all like 99%.
Right. And so what I'm saying is, how do you scale that model? So my first question is to Mr. Baeza, how do you implement some of the stuff that you both are agreeing or need to be implemented? Do you do that through law enforcement agencies, or do you have to do it through outside groups like Mr. Brown's group? And number two, to Dale Brown, how do you scale your model to low income communities where the crime is happening oftentimes the most perpetually? So Detective Baeza.
Yeah, well, when we talk about, I would say you'd have to go with Dale's model, because I don't know internally that you can fix anything that's wrong with policing nowadays. In the early 1990s, when we had Commissioner William Bratton and Deputy Commissioner Jack Maple in the New York City Police Department, they found a way to lower crime using the police force that they had. But unfortunately, that program that they used, which was called CompStat, has been basically ripped apart. And now what's happening is people juke the stats or fake the stats so that they can look good.
Yes.
So that program that they used, so Bratton and Maple, was the only one I've ever seen that worked. Now, I will just say this, one more comment, and one of them is about Detroit. Dale. In Orlando in 1968, there was a serial rapist that was attacking in Orlando, the city of Orlando. So the city of Orlando police chief decided, and this is in a study by Gary Kleck, but the city of Orlando police chief decided that he was going to say that he's going to train thousands of women in the use of a firearm, and they were going to get the training going right away, blah, blah, blah. So to make a long story short, they found that the rapes in Orlando now dropped down by 80-90%, and they increase because rape is not a crime that typically you can stop totally. Rape increased in the outside areas around Orlando. Now the Detroit police chief in 68, I think 68 it was, he had a lot of we call them bodegas. I don't know in Detroit if they call them bodegas, but the corner stores. They had a lot of robberies of the corner stores. So the police chief there, I think he went on, got some fire for this even back in 68, but he said, listen, we're going to arm and teach these store owners how to protect themselves. And immediately, I believe it was something of a magnitude of between 60 to 85% drop in armed robberies of these bodegas as soon as that was mentioned. Now, of course, when that died out, it came, things came back. But the psychology is what you're talking about, Dale. It's the psychology of it. So yeah, I don't think other than the one incident in policing that I saw, the one period in policing, I don't see that. I see Dale's concept as being more effective and as being more, you're able to enact that more on a private level, if you will, or you know, something like Dale's doing. I don't see the police. I have no. I'm sorry, but I have no. You know, I'm a cop. I love cops. I have cop friends, but I don't have any belief that the system is going to fix itself from within. I think we need people like Dale out there, and I'm really happy that you're doing what you're doing, Dale.
Thank you. I'm glad you brought that up. The psychology, because really, it's all it is. So you just said something that's very important. You said in both those cases, they said go get guns, and then there was a drop. What you didn't say was there was a huge number of shootings that happened.
Right.
So in other words, the gun didn't do it. It was the words about the gun. And that's how psychology works. It's about the belief system that there's an opportunity to do this here. So once you believe you can do something and you're a negative person, you do negative things. Same thing happens for positive people too. So if we say to them, your store can't have a gun, the criminal says, well, I can go rob that store. It has no gun. How about you say you could have a gun? You don't know. So what I found is that criminals are not, they're actually cowards. They're predators. Predators by definition would be what we call a coward. So a predator is someone who looks for opportunity to victimize. Two predators are safe. You ever see gang members fight each other? Not really. That's rare. We like to talk about it, but the truth is, if gang members would just shoot each other, we'd run out of gang members. The problem is they rape, rob, and kill people that aren't in gangs. The times when they get in trouble is when they accidentally hurt someone connected to a gang. Then you start hearing about shootouts. But most gang members are actually spending most of their time, whether it's the rolling 60s in California or wherever, they spend most of the time raping, robbing, killing non-violent people they believe they can harm. We just hear about the gang shootouts every once in a while, which is still rare. But the reality is people hurt people that they believe they can hurt when they're a predator. So once you create in the belief system of a coward that they can achieve something, they'll try it. And all we do is use psychology to make them believe there's no opportunity. And that's what you did in that story. The store owners, where they said that. Now here's what the difference is. Watch this. In Detroit, they really didn't tell anyone publicly that you should shoot criminals. So the police never came out specifically with that. Our chief is great, Chief Craig. He actually said to the citizens that were complaining that police response time wasn't there and people were getting hurt. They would call the police couldn't be there. And so he said, you need to get a shotgun to protect yourself. And of course, the police chief got heat for that, but that was the greatest thing ever, because that's really the truth. You are responsible for your own safety. The police are there to help you and to provide prosecutorial services after you are injured, after there's a robbery, after there's a law breaking. And the reality is that the gun is not the solution for violence. And if it was, I know some police officers would be alive right now. They could bench press 500, 600 pounds. I got people to come to me and go, I don't need your classes because I got a gun. Really? So what class did you take that makes you better than any dead police officer? Nothing. There's nothing that a dead police officer that was doing his job, had his gun out at the time, in most cases, still died, and you're not going to be better than them. So whatever fantasy you're living right now, you need to stop that and learn how to understand the psychology of predation. That's what we focus on, whether it's police or civilian. How do you read body language properly? How do you project body language to deter it in the first place? If a predator views you as a hardened target, they're not going to try. Think about it. When do criminals go up against officers that are in uniform? Not nearly as much as they do officers that are not in uniform. So that's one of the first things that I surveyed over the past 26 years of teaching police officers. I would ask them about their shootings. I would ask them about situations, and I would get their actual, story from them. And then I had another opportunity. That is, I have a lot of community contacts. So I have stories from criminals about instances that they were involved in. And then on top of that, we have our own experiences times thousands of events over the past 26 years of force-on-force conflict dealing with actual violent gangs. So we spent a lot of time, especially in the 90s, battling gangs. And I thought the gangs were like random groups. They're actually organized crime. So we just call them gangs because it's urban. If they were Italian, we call them mafia. But they really are a mafia. They have hierarchy. They have structure somewhat. They have some structure, but basically it's an enterprise, an economic enterprise. So when they go out and they're shooting people and they're doing these massive fightings, different things at different locations, there's usually some business behind this that we're not aware of. Is a bigger picture. But the psychology of everything is vital. And that's where, in order for us to understand everything that we need to understand to create a safer society, we must use psychology, not physicality, not policy. We're not going to change the belief of someone by a job. So we have to get them to see things properly to get them to understand what's best to do. So police officers looking at people as family will change a lot of the perspective of a police officer when he gets to the scene. Teaching police officers that they are the hero, here to help people, will get them to see themselves differently in the story. Rewarding officers, but most importantly, how can you have a system with no incentives that are positive? I had a lady say to me in one of our residents in our protected communities that we protect, she says, "You guys don't do nothing." I was driving by. I said, "Man, what do you mean?" She goes, "You guys don't do it, just drive around." I have no stories of you guys arresting anybody. I said, "Ma'am, we've been here for 4 years." This was 6 years ago in her community. I said, "Ma'am, have you heard of anyone being raped, robbed, or killed in your community since the day we started in Detroit?" This is inner city Detroit now. In the past 4 years we've been here. She said, "Oh, no, I didn't think of it that way." I said, "That's right. You have no rape, no robbery, no home invasion, no killing, no nothing in your community of 400 homes. And you have to understand something. This is Detroit. It's an urban environment. There's lots of people here. Those things are happening, just not in your community." She was like, "Oh, I didn't think of it that way." I said, "Do you remember the police cars across the street from your house last week? At that time, there was a shooting." She said, "Yes." I go, "Okay, that neighborhood, we don't work in that neighborhood, right?" I said, "There was a man shot at 9 o'clock in the morning 15 times, 1 block away from where we're standing right now." She was like, "Wow, I didn't think of it that way." I said, "Yes." So the murders are happening. The shootings are happening. They're just not happening in your community. I said, "Remember, the judge got shot. There was a judge, a federal judge that got shot literally 50 yards, 50 feet from our community on another community we don't protect." The judge was a part of a group of victims from 50 homes where these cliques of guys were home invading, abducting the whole family, taking them to banks, and robbing them. That didn't happen to anyone in our communities we protect. None, not one family. And we're across the street. Now here's the part about negativity. When you hear a negative story, it affects everyone negatively. So for the next year and a half, I was getting called even from news agencies from across this country and from other countries about the federal judge getting shot. The federal judge didn't even live in our community. So I'm answering questions, but people assumed it was our community because it's so close. All of our judges are fine. We have many judges live in our community. None of them are shot. And I did want to work in that community. They just decided not to hire us yet for some reason. But we create safety safely. And we do that by using psychology, not physicality. We create conditions where the criminals don't feel like you can come to that area. And we work with police doing that. So you see two different entities. So now what you see is inability to believe you can function here because you have both the public sector and the private sector working together.
So Dale, how do you scale that to across the country and to lower income communities so that a lot of those hot spots of crime can be alleviated?
So our plan is this, and we're already started our first franchise model. Our objective is to open training facilities across the country, eventually other countries. And anyone out there listening, please, let us know if you can help us. Our objective is to train police and civilians at one location at our training centers, which is what we've been doing for many years. And our objective is to get the business community to connect with law enforcement officers by actually donating money to their training. So imagine you're getting $50 an hour as a police officer to go to training. So even though you don't really like training, maybe you don't even see the value in it at first, what you will see the value in is the fact that this business community and families are donating money to your training. So now the officer feels a connection directly to the police, to the families, and to the business community that they're working in. So not only are they getting paid by the taxes in the state, but they're also getting donations for training for their families to have a better quality of life. And therefore you have training the officer getting, and they're not having to sacrifice their time. They're actually getting paid for that. We also need to reward officers every year, no matter where you work, no matter what city, town. You need to reward the officers for the positive outcomes. Officers that rescue people, officers that protect people. You need to look at officers that don't have lawsuits. Give them money for what you want, inspiration. Inspire the officers for what you want from them. Reward the officers for the positive outcomes. If one officer has no lawsuits and the other one has lots of lawsuits, the one you want to reward is the one with no lawsuits. Therefore, the officers want to act like that officer. You reward for what you want. You don't punish after things went wrong. So we need to create an incentive program for police, and that's after we provide them with law training. That's why I think it's interesting. A lot of people think the police know the law, like you're saying, you studied it. Well, that should be normal. And every day there should be updates if there's changes in the law. But there should also be, in my opinion, there should be a law channel because the laws are changing, no one knows about it. So, but imagine police should be experts in law. That's first and foremost. Experts. They should literally be experts in law because we're asking them to enforce laws. Secondly, an officer, a person who's providing protective services for the public, that person needs to be protected. How can the PPE of a person that protects everyone be less than a firefighter? A firefighter gets a firefighting vehicle. The police need a protection vehicle. What does the firefighter vehicle do? Not only is it specifically accommodates firefighters, it protects them from fire, by the way. And we need all police vehicles need to be protected from bullets. We expect police officers to go to gunfire, give them vehicles that make it safe for them to do that. That's number one. It is ridiculous. And I say this to civilians all the time. Why would you expect police to go to some place where bullets are flying if they don't have a bulletproof vehicle? That doesn't even make sense logically. Secondly, how can you give a motorcycle helmet, a full face covered helmet to a football player, to a motorcycle rider, but not to a police officer who catches bullets in the face? We have level 3 body armor, level 3 full body protection, including a helmet that protects the face of the officer. Why is that important? Because if an officer's face is exposed, you naturally feel fear. Why? Because you should. Someone could punch you in your face, acid, bullets, all these things are real. When you're going to someone's house you've never been to, you're going in some strange structure, you're going in the backyard. And then I explained this to people. Where's the incentive for going in the backyard of your house for this officer, which they do every day, okay? But think about this. Why was that okay for you to send them back there without the proper PPE, personal protection equipment? And my point is this, big picture. We have to come together, provide public protectors with all the things they need to protect us as a society. That's the foundation. Then the training, which I will provide, our system provides, because it's really a paradigm shift. It really empowers an officer to dominate threats first psychologically, so there's no physical contact, and so there's actually verbal compliance by building a trust bond between the police officer and the person. So the person trusts the police officer is not going to hurt them, which makes them want to comply in the first place. And then we create an incentive for the officer to want to do that without injury. In other words, if they don't have injured people, the police officer gets a bonus. So why is an officer not the wealthiest person, one of the wealthiest people in our society, when our wealth is dependent on them to provide us with the protection required to be wealthy? You cannot be wealthy if the police are not there to protect you, literally. Now you can hire private protection, but that's something separate, and it needs to be separate. Private protection is needed, and it's separate. It's not the same. It has a different agenda. When I go to a situation, my objective is to protect the families. When a police officer is there, comes there later, or comes there before us, those police officers are there for law enforcement. Those are two separate functions. You could use law enforcement to protect if you want, if it fits, that's fine. But I am not here for law enforcement. I'm here for protecting the family, protecting the corporation, protecting the company. First and foremost, I have to make sure this family is safe. I am not here to find out who's going to get prosecuted or how to gather evidence. That's none of my business. My business is how do I get this family to safety?
And I can see corporations hiring groups like yours to provide crime protection services for families in lower income neighborhoods to lift up the overall quality of life for everybody in the city and attract high quality, workers to want to live in that city. I could see corporations getting behind, investing in a nonprofit group like what you're doing in Detroit and providing those services for lower income communities. Don't you think so, Detective Baeza? I see that there's a private interest in having philanthropic investment in those kind of resources for inner communities that are having difficulty overcoming crime, right?
Yeah, I think it's great. I think it would be great if they did it. They had more private investigations of crimes by private individuals, and again, where the consumer would be the one to say, you know what, they're doing a good job, we're going to hire them again. And if you didn't do a good job or you didn't solve the crime, then maybe they wouldn't hire you again. So I think that
absolutely.
that's exactly what we want to really to get to. Like I said, I wish if it were private, it would be great for me.
Yeah.
But
Well,
I do think on this level, it's very helpful for the communities.
Well, I want to
Yes.
land the plane, guys. It's been a fascinating discussion. Do you guys have any questions or things for each other before we wrap up?
Let me add this one thing, very important, is that you have to love people to protect them. And money is the byproduct. It can't be the purpose, the point of protecting people. It can be for many things. Money is great for many things, but it can't be for protecting a life with your life, because your life is very important to you. You don't realize this. You're not going to be able to go in that backyard because you're about to get a financial bonus. Because if you die in the backyard, you won't get the bonus anyway. So you have to go back there because you love people. You don't want this person to have a criminal in their house. You don't want, the reason why you search the house properly is because if this was your mom's house, you'd want to do that. So my point is this, in closing, is that we need to transition from our concept that the prosperity that's naturally occurring from protection can be the purpose. The purpose is to protect human life and keep people alive and safe. And I promise you, you're going to make more money than you ever thought possible, because that's the byproduct of a safe, protected environment. And the private sector is vital. It's vital. There's no way you can have a non-private sector. You have to have both. The private sector does the private entity protection for the place or the person or the family or the corporation. You can't, and what we're doing right now is we're trying to get the police to be the private protection for people, which they can't do. You can't sit at someone's house and just protect them. You can't protect a corporation only, right? You have to protect everyone. That's what law enforcement officers have to do. So we have to, the blend is that we have to respect both entities, and we have to cultivate both of them together. And that's what our training centers are specifically designed to do. So we're hoping to find people that want to support us, support our initiatives to bring the police and the public together with one overall objective, and that is to create nonviolence. And the natural outcome from a nonviolent environment is prosperity for everyone, a better quality of life for the police and the public, but it's based upon protection over prosecution. And so at the end of the day, our objective is to provide that vehicle. We have the actual system. It actually works. We have police officers that testify to using our training to protect their lives and lives of others. So now it's proven. All we got to do now is take it to the marketplace. So that's why I'm glad you contacted me. So we look forward to working with anyone that wants to be a part of this evolution and paradigm shift in creating a safer public safety environment, and to focus on what we call the anti-kill philosophy. The anti-kill philosophy is literally a philosophy that says there's always a way to preserve human life under all conditions. And if you start with that belief system, what you're going to do is create a situation where you have a lot less injury and death associated with actions or inactions. So ultimately, we just need a paradigm shift in our thought process. We need to love people, and we need to provide people with the training and the protection equipment they need to create the safety we all need in order to have a prosperous and more successful society.
Very good. Detective Baeza, that reminds me of what you told me about when you would make your victims, you felt like they were part of your family. And that
Great.
one serial rapist you told me about, how that grieved you when you guys were never able to find that guy, right?
Yeah, still have that one case that's unsolved. I think every detective has that one case that's unsolved that really breaks your heart. But, I treated all the victims as if they were my relatives. And, again, you think about, if you care about your work, you care about the people, like Dale was saying, you care about people like they're your family. It doesn't end. The sorrow and the feeling of blame on myself that I didn't solve the case, it doesn't end. Whether it's my fault or not, I bear the brunt. I'm the one who speaks to the victims. But, having said that, I just had a victim get back in contact with me from that case. And she wanted to thank, even though it's not solved, she wanted to thank us because we made them a part of the case. We explained what was happening. We put them in the car with us. So basically, they wanted to thank us for making them part of the process, and it helped them to get through some of the terrible trauma that they had to go through. But
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure talking to both of you all. You're two great heroes for a lot of people, and we hope that this will spark a much needed conversation in media. I'm doing my part with this platform, but we need to hear from you two on many other platforms, because this is the conversations that we need to be happening about crime prevention and law enforcement. So thanks again for joining me.
Thank you.
for having me.
Thanks, Dale. Bye.
Thank you.